Hello, Literature and Writing 308A students. Welcome back. Here we go with lesson 6. So you saw in Unit 1 what Old English looked like when the Normans first took over England in 1066. That's exactly what you did in your recitation 1. So that language would change dramatically over the course of the next 200 years. For the rest of the 11th century and all of the 12th century, which remember is the 1100s, very few educated, powerful people spoke Old English. Most of the nobility and aristocracy spoke French. You may recall that William got rid of the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy. He either killed them or he dispossessed them. So the people who were left with power and the people who were speaking the language that were educated were all speaking French. The peasants, the freemen, the townsfolk, people like that, they spoke Old English, but anybody who wanted to work for the royals had to learn French. So there was a class of people at this point during the 11th and 12th and into the 13th century who spoke both English and French. People who served the nobility, who worked with and for them, and even lower class or peasantry people might learn some words of French, just enough to communicate with the people that they needed to. So French started to pervade the language. The only education was in French, so English became almost an entirely oral language then for about 250 years. Not 100% oral, but a large percent. I can't tell you an exact percent, 80 or 90, a lot. Very few people were writing and reading Old English at this point. What this meant then is that the language became unmoored from the stabilizing effect of writing. Writing tends to stabilize a language, or at least it has up until the advent of the internet, which is a huge game changer, and it's not in line with some of the things that happened before because it's a game changer. With the printing press, what had happened when people started to write a lot more, we'll get to this in the Renaissance, but it holds the language down. So when we write things down, it locks them into that written form, and it holds the language down. And because it's written down that way, we see it the same exact way every single time. So the language didn't have anything that was mooring it down or holding it down or keeping it the same, and it was influenced by a huge amount of French words. Language in general changes towards ease of articulation, which means that the complicated analytical grammar system of Old English shifted towards the more easy or relatively easier syntactical grammatical system of Middle English, which is a lot closer to modern English. If you don't know what analytical and syntactical are in terms of languages, that's okay. It's the difference between a language that's based on word endings versus a language that's based on where the word is in the sentence. Our language is based on where the word is in the sentence, and that's the syntactical language. Anyway, by the time we get to Chaucer in the 14th century, what had been Old English has transformed over the course of those 250-ish years from Beowulf's language into Chaucer's language. And this is what you're doing in your recitation. You recited some Old English, now you're going to see what it was like after that change. The French words that came into the language represent class difference, among other things. The French words tend to designate things that are more high class or fancy or aristocratic, which you can especially see in examples from food. Food, from Old English foda, or cuisine, to use the fancy French term, cuisine. For example, you do not say, I am eating cow for dinner tonight. Cow comes from the Anglo-Saxon word cou. Instead, you say, I am eating beef for dinner. Beef comes from the Old French word bœuf. Likewise, you don't say, I am eating swine tonight, which comes from the Old English word swine. Instead, you eat pork, which comes from the Old French word pork. Likewise, we don't eat sheep, which comes from the Old English word chèvre. Instead, we eat mutton, which comes from the Old French word mouton. You're seeing a pattern here, right? We don't eat deer, which comes from the Old English word dehors. We eat veal, which comes from the Anglo-Norman French word veal. Vegetarians have fancy options too. We eat salad, from French salada, instead of leaves, from Old English leaf. Are there other areas of culture where you can find words with English roots operating alongside words with French roots? I don't know, think about it. But oftentimes you'll see in English a word that represents the working class version of that thing. Like it's the farmers who are in the third estate who are raising the cow. But it's the French aristocrats who are getting to eat it and talk about it. And so you see here where the different usages are parallel for their different purposes depending on where you are in the hierarchy. Language really does carry values inside of it. This is one of the things that English language studies, literary studies teaches us through things like structuralist theory and post-structuralist theory. We learn that language actually does house these value systems, like things like what's considered high class or fancy versus what's considered working class. This brings us then to the general prologue by Geoffrey Chaucer. Chaucer writes in a dialect of Middle English that would come to dominate English, which is the southern dialect of the London area. One of the main differences from today is spelling. Spelling in the medieval period was inconsistent. There were no rules of grammar or spelling at the time. That doesn't come until the 18th century when 18th century grammarians decided to make a bunch of rules based on Latin. It's kind of a strange story. So that's why we have a lot of strange grammatical rules. Things would be spelled in different places and from person to person, place to place. In fact, the dialects of Middle English were so different from each other that people from the north of England had a hard time understanding people from the south of England and vice versa. It was such a difference in the way in which they talked and spoke because their languages had evolved separately, or at least with less contact. Like everybody in the south was all speaking to each other, everybody in the north was all speaking to each other. There was less contact between them. So over time, especially since the language got unmoored from writing, people couldn't even understand each other within England. So as you are reading the general prologue, one thing that you can do is just try to imagine a kindergartner wrote it, and then it'll be easier to understand it. Just be like, oh, the spellings, however. In Middle English, the vowel sounds are just like they were in Old English. As a reminder, A makes the sound of ah as in father. E makes the sound of A as in hey. I makes the sound of E as in P. O makes the sound of O as in no. And U makes the sound of oo as in poo, not you or ew. The consonants don't really deviate from contemporary pronunciation. All right, so let's take a look at the opening lines of the general prologue of the Canterbury Tales. I'm going to read the whole thing through once, and then I'll go through each couplet individually. Juan that April, with his shores sota, the drought of March hath pierced to the rota, and bathed every vine in sweet liquor, of which virtue engendered is the floor. Juan Zephyrus, with his sweet breath, inspired hath in every halt, and hath the tender croppus, and the young son hath in the ram his halve course run, and small fools machen melodia, that slepen all the night with open ear. So pricketh hem natura in her courages, than along in folk to gone on pilgrimages, and pomerous for to seg and strange strandes, to ferne halwes, couth in sondre landes, and specially from every sheerest end of England to Canterbury thy wend, the holy blissful martyr for to sake, that him have holpen, Juan that thy were sake. All right, what does that even mean? Well, I'll talk to you about it as I go through each line by line. Lines 1 through 2. Juan that April, with his sure sota, the drought of March hath pierced to the rota. So what does this mean? Well, it means April. When April comes with his many showers, his sweet showers, right? Rain showers, the drought of March has pierced to the root, right? So when April's sweet showers has pierced the drought in March to the root, when April rains and it finally covers what was a drought in March, then lines 3 to 4. And bathed every vein in sweet liquor, of which virtue engendered is the floor. So when April's beautiful showers has pierced March's drought to the root and bathed every vine, every single thing that's living, every living thing in such beautiful liquor, right? In such beautiful liquid, the rain. And once it's done that, the virtue of that rain engenders all the beautiful flowers. April showers bring May flowers. That's what those first 4 lines tell us. Lines 5 to 6. So we had when April comes and brings the rain, then lines 5 to 6. Juan Zephyrus ake with his sweet breath, in spirit hath in every halt and hath. So when Zephyrus, or Zephyr, the west wind, or the god of the west wind, depending on how you read it, when Zephyr comes with his beautiful breath, so this beautiful wind, and that wind inspires everything in all the local meadows and little nooks and crannies all over the place, every holt, every little place that you can find in every heath, every meadow. When that happens, and they inspire, lines 7 through 8, the tender kroppus. So the tender kroppus, and the junge son hath in the ram his halve corsi run. So when the beautiful zephyr breeze comes and inspires in all the places the tender crops, he inspires all the crops, and the young son in the ram has run half his course. So the ram is Aries, right? Which Aries comes in April. And when the sun has gone halfway through Aries, then we get to line 9 and 10. And smale fools maken melodia that slepen all the night with openia. So when little birds are singing blah, 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 that stay up all night with their eyes open, tweet, 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 all night long. So when all these things are happening, when April is here with all of the rain, and when the west wind comes and all of these things inspire all the crops everywhere, and the little birds come out and start to sing all night long, then we get to line 11. So we have the shift there. So pricketh hem natur in here garages, then along and folk to gone on pilgrimages. So nature pricks them in their in their courages. So nature is pricking all the people in their courage, and that makes them want to long to go. It makes us long to go on pilgrimages or to go traveling. Once spring comes, we want to go traveling on pilgrimages. Line 13 through 14. And palmeras for to saken stranja strandis, to ferne hallways, couth in sondri landis. So palmers are people who essentially are professional pilgrims, people that bring palm fronds with them to highlight how when Jesus entered the city on Palm Sunday, people held palm fronds in front of him. So that marks, so they're called palmers because they brought palm fronds also. So palmers are going to seek strange strands, strange places, beaches, other places. They're going to go to faraway shrines. Hallways is shrines. Hallways, not really hallways, but it means shrines. To faraway shrines that are couth or known in many lands, sundry, many lands. Lines 15 through 16. And specially from every sheerest end of England to Canterbury thy wenda. So all the palmers and the pilgrims are going to run out. So from all the shires all across Canterbury, from every single little county, every little place, every town, every little village, they're going to come from all the shires of England, and they're going to go to Canterbury. They're going to wend their way there. From every sheerest end of England, all the shires of England, to Canterbury thy wenda. They all wend their way there. They go. So line 17 and 18. The holy blissful martyr for Toseka, that him hath holpen, Juan that thy were seka. So where are they all going once the beautiful April pricks them in their courage? They're going to go seek the holy blissful martyr of Canterbury, the Archbishop Thomas à Becket of Canterbury, that helps everyone when they're sick. So that's who they're going to go visit, is the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he's a saint because he was hewn down at the altar. Yeah, go look that story up if you want to hear an interesting story. All right, so basically in the first 18 line, Chaucer's telling us that it's spring, it's April, the warm wind and the rain has inspired all the beautiful green plants because this horrible thing called winter is over. Now, we don't have winter here in California, but it's yucky and snowy and cold, and you can't really be outside, and it feels gross. And when you can look outside and it finally starts to not be freezing cold, and you feel a little bit of warmth in the wind, and you feel like, oh, I can get out of my house, and then the sun starts to come out and the little buds start to come out. It's magical. We don't really have that here, but if you've ever lived in a place with seasons, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And maybe we'll understand after we get a vaccine for COVID and people can start traveling freely again and doing things again. Maybe we'll feel the same way that Chaucer is describing here in the Canterbury Tales of like, finally we can get out! All right, good luck with your recitation too. You can do a practice run with me here in this lesson or during my office hours. You got this. All right.